right, guys, today we're going to test out the Tazer JL and see if adjusting or recalibrating the computer for the larger tire size makes any difference. So on my 2020 Ecodiesel JL Wrangler, I have the factory calibration settings currently, and that is calibrated for the Rubicon tires, which are 32.8 inches. On the previous video, if you want to go check it out, we added 37 by 12.5 inch Nitto trail grapplers on Teraflex Nomad wheels, and that new wheel assembly now weighs 118 pounds with the tire. And I weighed the factory tires and wheels before we did that, and I believe it was around 73.8 or 74 pounds. But I wanted to see if recalibrating my speedometer to the right tire size with the Tazer JL actually makes a difference. If you want to see the video about installing Tazer JL and some really annoying things that it actually fixes for you, that is coming up in my next video, so make sure you smash that subscribe button. Lots of stuff coming around modifying and off-roading with the 2020 Ecodiesel Wrangler. All right, I'm gonna get some gas, fill up the Jeep, and then I'm gonna take it on a 50-kilometer round trip, which I think is about 30.6 miles. So 50 kilometers back to this gas station. We'll fill it up, see how much gas it used with the factory settings, and then we'll go and do that exact 50-kilometer run again and see how much, I think I just said gas, see how much fuel, diesel fuel, the Ecodiesel Wrangler uses. And I probably not going to be the last time I say gas, because I've never owned a diesel vehicle and been running gas for years. Something that most of the gas stations here, at least in British Columbia, they don't have these locks to fill up, but all the diesel pumps do. Interesting that I've noticed owning a diesel vehicle so far. So this is a little bit of a different run than we did in the previous video with the stock tires versus 37s. I've selected an area of highway that should have much less inclines and declines. It should be fairly flat. If you're wondering about how I'm tracking my speed, I am using Google Maps, which will show me my speed using GPS. So a lot of this driving is at either 90 kilometers an hour or 55 miles per hour, or 80 kilometers an hour, which is 50 miles per hour. As for the Nitto trail grapplers, so far my experience with them, they are much quieter than the BF Goodrich Cam 2s that I threw on here for the previous test, or when I drive my JK around. But I do find them very quiet and they're very smooth. We did have them balanced. Trevor at Paradigm Auto Works did a great job balancing them, and they're super smooth. They are wider, so that even though they are a 12.5 inch tire, they are nearly 13.5 inches when you measure them out. And I find that the Jeep just generally wanders a little bit less because of that, or you're having to make less steering inputs and steering corrections because of that. Do have these tires at 29 PSI, which is generally where I've run larger 37-inch tires in the past. So I'm going to recalibrate the speedometer or the computer to tell it that we have, it was 36.8 inches. And before this, I went through and made sure that that was the right calibration for this tire size. I checked the after speed with GPS, as well as I drove through some of those speed monitoring zones that show you your speed, so that I could compare it to what I was seeing on my speedometer. And at 36.88 inches in the calibration, it was within, you know, it was not even, I couldn't even tell, like it was within 1 or 2 kilometers plus or minus, depending on how fast the GPS or the radar was updating compared to my speedometer. So I'm gonna say that's pretty much bang on with the calibration for these tires. After we finish this test, we'll change that in the computer. We'll reboot the system, which is another feature of the Tazer JL, and make sure that all those settings are input. And auto start stop is turned off of this, so you can see I'm just waiting at a light to turn left onto the next section of highway, and the motor is still running, and because auto start stop is disabled right now. We are in 6th gear, currently doing 80 kilometers an hour, 7th gear as we finish our acceleration, and I think we'll get up to 8th here in a second. And we are in 8th gear doing slightly over 80 kilometers an hour. Now I do have to say that with the 8-speed transmission, the downshifts to 7th are super smooth and are not abrupt at all, like in previous generation transmissions where the difference between gears when it downshifts is much more substantial. I know that in JKs with the other transmissions, hunting for gears can be more abrupt and noticeable, but in the 8-speed transmission and the way that it is set up for the diesel is super smooth. And for those who are wondering if the 37s rub at all at full lock with no lift, there is zero rubbing at full lock. Now obviously the suspension is not cycling, but as far as on-road goes, there is zero rubbing at full lock, even at some speed in that parking lot. And if you want to see the shift points from a stop to highway speed, we will just moderately accelerate with the pace of traffic. Set 3rd gear, 4th gear, 5th gear, and we're gonna go to 6, just over 2,000 RPM. So the shift points are fairly consistent, right around 2,000 RPM. We are just around 90 kilometers an hour with the GPS. It is an uphill climb. We are in 7th gear, 1,600 RPM. All right, we are just about to pull back into the fuel station. We'll top up the tank. We'll recalibrate the computer and do that run one more time. And after that run is done, we'll go back to that on-ramp and see if there's any improvements on our 0 to 100 kilometers or 0 to 60 mile per hour time. So we'll top up the tank and just see how much fuel we used and see how close that actually is. All right, so I could barely get 2.159 liters in there for 50 kilometers of driving. Really didn't use much fuel at all. I really had to kind of push it to get even that much in. So we'll do this again and see if there's any difference with the Tazer JL. Just calibrating the tire size to 36.8. We will set that, and then I'm gonna go through and reboot the Jeep. So full reboot takes about a minute, and make sure that all the computer is updated. Then we'll shut the vehicle off, open the door, make sure it's completely shut off. Then we will do our fuel economy test. Hopefully we will get some meaningful results, because we used way less fuel than I thought we would to travel that 50-kilometer route. All right, we are rebooted. Let's head out on our trip. We'll reset our computer for the fuel economy. There we go. And so we have 569 kilometers of range. And let's see how we do. We'll check the shift points once again. Entering the highway, 60 kilometers an hour. Choose 60 kilometers an hour, 5th gear. Accelerating, very light throttle. Shifting into 6. Doing 80 kilometers an hour, and now it's just throttle off, 7th gear immediately, and probably hit 8th gear here in just a second. Yeah, there you go. We've kind of got this long hill climb coming out of town. We're down into 6th gear, holding about 80 kilometers an hour, 1,700 RPM. We are at the 90 kilometer an hour section, which we are doing 90 kilometers an hour, and it's holding 8th gear just fine. So this would be about 55 miles per hour. I would imagine that we would hold 8th gear if we were doing 60 or 65 miles an hour, or 100, 110. We just don't have a place where I can do that legally, and I don't really notice much difference at all at this point in the shifting. I think it might be slightly more aggressive to downshift on some of the inclines. At our speed limits at 80 kilometers an hour, it's definitely barely enough RPM to get into 8th gear. It just barely wants to get there. But I think a little bit faster if you're traveling at 90 or 100, I think it'll hold 8th gear just fine. We're just going to accelerate onto the highway here. We wanted to see if there's any difference in shift points. Very light acceleration. This is just very minimal throttle input. Fourth gear, fifth gear at 2000 RPM. Sixth gear. So generally with mild acceleration, we are seeing shifts around 2000 RPM, up into seventh, and we are going to get to 80 kilometers an hour, or sorry, 90 kilometers an hour, and probably level out into eighth gear here. There we go there. So, but we are just keeping with the pace of traffic at 90 and around 1600 RPM, and holding seventh gear to do so up this steep grade. So just accelerating a bit to pass. Very smooth downshift into sixth to get us back up to 90 kilometers an hour. And once we do so, right back into seventh. You know, anything below 100, seventh gear seems to be the go-to gear for a lot of driving, unless you need some heavier acceleration, and it will drop right back down into sixth, the 1-to-1 gear. The big question is whether or not to re-gear. Well, for my 80 kilometer an hour or 50 mile an hour highways, we seem to really struggle to get into eighth gear and quickly shift out of eighth into seventh as soon as any acceleration or incline occurs. But you know, that is pretty slow. That's 50 miles an hour, and I can't get the RPMs up high enough, and so it wants to stay in seventh. As soon as I get to about 90 kilometers an hour or 100 kilometers an hour, which is about 60 miles an hour, it gets up into sixth and holds that just fine in the 1300 RPM range. So whether or not regearing is necessary, I think you could probably get a little bit more performance and maybe some fuel economy by regearing, but I wouldn't want to add too steep of gears at all. We have 373s from the factory. Maybe 455s would be as high as I would go on 37s. I'll have to look at some of the calculations, but I really feel like if you travel on a higher speed highway where you're maybe doing 65, 70 miles an hour all the time, I don't think that there would be too much trouble getting into eighth gear while you're cruising along. But I definitely feel like the diesel engine and the transmission tuning, and with recalibrating the speedometer, does a pretty good job with 37s without regearing. Way better than my JK with the 3.8 liter and its really old minivan transmission for sure. So I'll leave it up to you guys. I don't think I would spend the money to regear at this point. Maybe if you didn't have a Rubicon and you wanted to add lockers, or if I was putting a Pro Rock 44 front axle in, then I would consider regearing the back. Or if I was stepping up to tons and maybe larger tires, absolutely regear. But at this point, I think the money for regearing would be better spent on other modifications. And if you're wondering whether or not you should buy a Tazer JL, well, hit that subscribe button for my next upcoming video. We may or may not see much as far as shift points go or potential fuel economy, but I absolutely think that this is a great purchase, and I'll tell you why in the next video. The pump is not allowing any more fuel to go in, and it's not going to give us an accurate enough reading to tell us exactly how much fuel we needed between the two tests, with only going 50 kilometers. However, with the recalibrated computer for the 37s, we did average 8.4 liters per 100 kilometers, which works out to be 27 miles per gallon. Let's go do a 0-60 pull. Ooh, that's a little faster.